Several years ago, I found myself in a prison camp in Hanoi, North Vietnam. I was 24 years old, Naval Academy graduate, fighter pilot, flying the hottest thing in the world at the time, the F-4 Phantom jet. I could go twice the speed of sound in this jet. And I was blown out of the sky. I found myself in an 8-foot by 8-foot prison cell. And I could pace 3 steps one way and 3 steps the other. That was going to be my life for the next 6 years. Now, what I found was interesting because the restriction in this prison cell was not the 8 feet between the walls. It turned out to be the 8 inches between my ears. This is going to be a mental game. This is going to be something that I could decide and even control on my own. And I think it's the same in the mortgage industry. Yeah, we've had some tough years, no question about that. Maybe the good news is coming, but it's going to be a while before you start getting those big commissions again. We all hope that this rate's going to go down and inventory's going up, and yeah, but it's going to take some grit on your part, grit on the people that you work for and work with. And so how do you muster up that kind of grit? Well, as prisoners of war, we did, and it worked. And so some of the same techniques that we used as prisoners of war can be used, I believe, in the mortgage business. And I'll explain some of that. But here's the statistic, all right? A study was done, it was 8 or 9 years ago, of all the Vietnam veterans. 30.6% of all Vietnam veterans have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Of the prisoners of war, 4% have post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, there's a new term. We're sort of the poster boys for what they call PTG, post-traumatic growth. The whole idea that you can go through a downtime in the mortgage industry and come back better than if you hadn't had that experience. And that's what my whole story is going to be about. So there I was, 8-foot by 8-foot cell, feeling sorry for myself. Misery, download, failed at my task. This is kind of an interesting thing that most people have trouble understanding, that as a prisoners of war, we were not heroes at all. We'd done something wrong. We had not accomplished the mission. And that's the whole idea. And so when you get shot down and you're in the torture ropes and irons, you kind of you have trouble, focusing on the big picture of things. Things really hurt, but that's where you learn things, is when the challenge is on. I got to bet it says that, the two things, you can either win or you learn. And that's the whole idea of what we're going through now. We are in a learning process. And if you can't pick up on this, if you can't really decide that, hey, there is purpose to this, there's reason in this, adversity is a horrible thing to waste. So how do you waste the adversity? Pretty easy. Blame everybody you can think of. Blame the Fed, okay? Blame the market. Blame the manager. Blame the spouse. And what happens is, when you blame other people for your problems, your choices go away. So I believe the whole thing about the business that you're in is packing parachutes. Let me explain that. Several years after I came home from Vietnam, I was in a restaurant in Kansas City where I used to live. About 2 tables over, a guy kept looking at me, and I caught his eye, but I didn't recognize this gent. This guy stood up. He walked over to our table. He pointed at me with a very stern look on his face. "You're Captain Plumb." I looked up at this guy. "I'm Captain Plumb." He said, "You're that guy. You're that guy. You flew jet fighters in Vietnam. You're a fighter pilot. You were part of that Top Gun outfit in Miramar, California. You were on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You were shot down. You parachuted in enemy hands. You were tortured, and you spent 6 years as a prisoner of war." I looked up at this guy. I was dumbfounded. I said, how did you know all that?" He said, "I'm the guy that packed your parachute." Wow. Well, I've made a lot of speeches over the years. And I was suddenly speechless by this guy. Best I could do was stagger to my feet, reach out a very grateful hand of thanks. He came up with the proper words. He grabbed my hand, he pumped my arm, and he said, "I guess it worked." Well, I said, "Yes, sir, indeed it did." And I must tell you, I've said a lot of prayers of thanks for your nimble fingers, but I had no idea I'd ever had the opportunity of expressing my gratitude to you in person. He said, "I've always wondered, were all the panels there?" I said, "Well, I appreciate your concern." And to be honest with you, no, they weren't. Of the 18 panels I was supposed to have in that parachute, I had only 15 good ones. 3 of the panels were torn, but it wasn't your fault. It was I ejected from that F-4 Phantom jet at 600 knots close to the ground. I was well outside the envelope of that parachute. I said, "But let me ask you a question. Do you keep track of all the parachutes you pack? Do you know of all the lives you saved?" The guy said, "No." And now this is the most important part of the conversation that night. And in fact, I think it deals directly with your job, okay? The mortgage lender. Here's what he said. He said, no, I don't keep track of all the parachutes I pack. It's enough gratification for me just to know that I've served. Just to know that I've helped somebody out along life's rocky road. Here's a sailor, okay, well below the waterline of this aircraft carrier. His job is to stand at a long wooden table, weaves the shrouds, folds the silk panels of these parachutes, passes them along one after another, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, while the jet jockey, okay, while the Top Gun zooms around the sky at the speed of sound, couldn't have cared less about the guy down there in the hole until one day my parachute came along and he packed mine up for me. Can I make this metaphor, okay, to this experience in your life? You see, we got a lot of clients out there, a lot of customers, a lot of home buyers, a lot of folks that are hanging those parachutes. They can barely make their mortgage payment at 7%. That was an interesting statistic, Brian, that so many people have these high mortgage rate mortgages, and now rates are coming down, and what an opportunity. But they're hanging in that parachute, okay? They're trying to make ends meet, and they may have some other problems that we don't even know about with medical issues and job issues, and they need your help. They need you to pack their parachute. Now, here's the key to parachute packing, okay? You see, it's a matter of giving without asking anything in return. Now, this sounds crazy, but I'm convinced that the more you help other people get what they want, then you will get what you want. You'll have a happy life by giving and sharing. And that's parachute packing. But I'll tell you this, I didn't get much sleep that night after I'd met this guy. I tried to remember back in my mind, maybe I met him on the passageway of that aircraft carrier, or maybe sometimes at Liberty, in some foreign port. And I probably just brushed by this guy and didn't say thank you or hello or anything else, because after all, he was a lowly sailor, and after all, I was a Top Gun fighter pilot. And I felt a little guilty about that, to tell you the truth. So the question becomes, how's your parachute packing coming along? Who is it that looks to you for strength in time of need? And maybe another question is, how's your parachute packed? Where do you go when the going gets tough? Who do you look to in those challenging times? And have you thanked them lately? Well, mine was pretty well packed. My parachute had good panels in my parachute. Not only the physical parachute, but my mental parachute. Had the skills of my craft. I was an engineer, Naval Academy graduate. Was a fighter pilot. That took 18 months of training. I was a pretty good pilot. So my mental parachute, pretty good shape. My emotional parachute, pretty stable guy. My spiritual parachute, I knew the Lord. got my parachute packed, same place you did early in life. Mom, dad, big sister, two brothers, and today, you know, I got to talk about Brian. I've known this guy for a long time. We've worked together for years and years in this business. I don't think there's a better parachute packer in the mortgage business than Brian Hale. It really is true. Follow this guy. I mean, it's not only is he a very knowledgeable guy and keeps up with all of the stuff that you and I don't have time to keep up with. He's a very personal guy as well, and a good friend. So the parachute packers in my life early on, mom, dad, big sister, two little brothers, a coach. I'll never forget, named Smith. If Clarence Smith was still alive, I would have called him this morning to thank him for packing my parachute. He was a veteran, had shrapnel in one leg from his war. He walked with a limp. This is ragtag basketball. Okay, we lost and lost and lost. I mean, little bitty town, 325 souls, and a couple of Presbyterians, and this coach. The last game of the season, it would be the last game he'd ever coach, and we lost again. Imagine one dejected 13-year-old lad wandering off to the locker room. Here comes the coach. He caught up with me, and I felt his arm over my sweaty shoulder. And I looked at the coach and I said, I'm sorry, coach. Guess this team's just a bunch of losers. The coach squeezed my shoulder. He sunk his fingernails into the flesh. He was about to say something he didn't want me to forget. He said, son, whether you think you're a loser or whether you think you're a winner, you're right. And he was right. This was a thought process. It had nothing to do with what was around me. It was my thinking about what was around me. And it's a Naval Academy. I had great leaders there, and I learned a lot, but I got my parachute packed. Again, professors and officers and other midshipmen, and the superintendent, the head mogul of the school, this guy, Admiral Charles Kirkpatrick, we call him the Soup. He would, before the football game, would clench his fists, and you could see the veins running his brow, but he would say, you guys can do anything you set your minds to do. Was this hype? Mental manipulation? Did it work? Those 4 years, the Naval Academy produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners in 4 years. We were the number 2 and number 1 college team in the nation. Best of all, Navy beat Army 4 times straight. So the point of this is that both those guys inspired me. Okay, they empowered me. They empowered me to win, which was beautiful. But more importantly, they empowered me to fail. Did you get that part? Life is a choice. You can do anything you set your mind to do. Those are positive or negative. You can take those either way. They empowered me to win. They empowered me to fail. Most importantly, they empowered me to make my choice between the two. And so it is in the mortgage business. Look what you've got. Look what you've got, okay? Look at the opportunity. I mean, first of all, if you're an American, you won the lottery already. Now, look at the folks within a 20-mile radius that need your help, that need you to pack their parachute. That they don't really understand the opportunity until you explain it to them. And you got to get out there and tell them, hey, man, we think interest rates are coming down. We're going to be able to save you some money. We're going to get you in a 6% loan, maybe. At least it's going to be better than what you got. And so anyway, that's parachute packing. And both those guys, both the coach and the superintendent, empowered me to win and to fail. And I got to tell you, I think that's one of the problems of our country today. Our society will not let our young people fail. We pat them on the button and give them a trophy even when they lose. We give them a trophy. Life's not like that. And the young people grow up and they get into the real world and find out that not everybody's patting them on the back. So anyway, I graduated from Annapolis. I went to flight training. John McCain was one of my flight instructors. He taught me to fly jets. Tough guy, tough instructor, and tough in the prison camp. as well. I launched on the aircraft carrier Kitty. I waved goodbye to my wife. I had married my high school sweetheart under the arch of swords. You know, my buddies were holding up their swords. We came out of the chapel, and just a beautiful day. Flight training, 18 months. Got my Navy wings of gold. So proud of that. Launched on the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. I waved goodbye to my wife and told her I'd be back in 8 months. Almost made it. Brian told you I was 5 days before the end of my tour. 74 successful combat missions. Had a co-pilot in my back seat, my radar intercept officer. He and I were on a target just south of Hanoi. The plane was hit by a surface-to-air missile. Exploded the some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel we had on board. Sent that bird topsy-turvy, end over end, down towards the rice paddy below. I ejected, my co-pilot ejected, our parachutes opened, and we came floating down over enemy territory. Ever been in one of those parachutes? I don't mean the nylon ones. I'm talking about the parachutes of life. See, that's what this discussion is all about. I'm talking about something as insignificant as being cut out of your lane on the highway, something as major as the loss of a child. But really, honestly, isn't that where your value lies? Let's try to measure it, okay? Just for fun, let's measure the value of you. What are you worth? What are you worth to your family? What are you worth to your company? What are you worth to your creator? You see, it can't be measured in the easy times. Anybody can show up. Notice that? Anybody can write out the contract, take the order, answer the phone, log on, okay? We learned that, you know, and 21, 22, that's all we had to do, man. Money was flowing in. But your real value shows up in 23 and 24, right? That's when you prove your worth. That's today. So there it was, hanging in the parachute. Bowed my head, said a prayer for my wife, because this was my war and not hers. And at the end of the Vietnam War, she would feel more pain from that war than I did. It was tough on the ladies. And the families left behind. Hit the ground, sunk about waist deep in a rice paddy. They captured me immediately. They were shooting at me as I was falling from the sky. You know, I thought, man, that's not fair. They just knocked down my multi-gazillion-dollar airplane. Now they're shooting at the pilot. So they hauled me into the prison camp, tortured for 2 days with ropes and irons and whips, and pretty miserable. Tossed me into that little cell, the one I described to you from the very beginning, that 8-foot by 8-foot cell. And I thought that was my restriction. Well, it took me a while to figure that out. And I paced along there. Let me tell you about my physical state, okay? I was bleeding from 4 open wounds, 4 holes in my body where blood's running out, no medical care at all. I was developing these boils. We never really understood where they came from, but every fighter pilot shot down over there got these big old, ugly carbuncle boils all over our bodies. I was down to about 115 pounds. I weigh 175 today. I was surviving on 2 bowls of rice a day and a little broth sometimes. Didn't have enough meat to hold a coffee cup full of meat for a year. So my physical state, right, pretty grim. My physical state was the good news. The bad news was my mental state. I'd given up. I had surrendered. Surrender is not in the Top Gun playbook. You probably figured it out. We are not taught to surrender. We're taught to be strong. We're taught to be bulletproof. What about that? So there I was, pacing back and forth, feeling sorry for myself, blaming the enemy, blaming the mechanic that put my airplane together, blaming the president for starting the war. I'm in misery and pain in this pity party of my own, okay? And I heard in the far corner of the prison cell the chirping noise of a cricket. I'd been a farm kid, knew what a cricket sounded like. Yet the longer I listened to this cricket, the more rhythmic the sound became. I walked over to the corner of my prison cell to investigate. Found there no cricket, but a little piece of wire about that long, poked through a hole at the base of the cell wall and scratching on my concrete floor, making this chirping noise like a cricket. Are you with me? Can you imagine what might be going through your mind in a situation like this? Now, I knew it wasn't the enemy. I knew they weren't sophisticated enough to try to trick me. So I figured it's got to be another American. If it's another American in this prison camp, it's got to be a fighter pilot like me. Boy, we can tell some stories. But I bet that guy's tougher than I am. He's probably older, more mature, better pilot. He probably didn't spill his guts when he was tortured. I'm losing interest now in communicating with anybody. I don't want to tell anybody how weak I was, how badly I'd failed. So maybe I'll just crawl over here in the corner of this prison cell and wait. Surely in a few years, the Marines will break down the gates and I'll be set free. I'll never have to take another risk the rest of my life. Now, there's an interesting concept, this deal of risk. We deal a lot about risk in the mortgage business. We have ways to measure risk tolerance. We have risk avoidance. We try to get the best deal, all the time with as little risk as possible. But I'm here to suggest to you that if you can't take a risk once in a while, you're probably not going to reach your goal. I'm talking about calculated risk. I'm not talking about walking in front of a bus. But I'm talking about opening up your tender underbelly and do some things that you don't really know what the outcome's going to be. And I'm talking about going to that client that wasn't too happy, with your proposal, a month ago. Talking to that spouse, about that unspeakable topic. That's risky. But I'm convinced that if you can't take a risk once in a while, if you can't step outside yourself, if you can't do those things you don't really want to do, you're not going to make it to that goal you've set. So I reached down and tugged on the wire. The wire tugged back. I tugged again. The wire disappeared right back through that rat hole. Came back about an hour later. The wire had a note wrapped around the end of it. The note was written on a dirty piece of toilet paper, just blobs on this wadded up piece of toilet paper. I could barely make it out, but it said, memorize this code, then eat this note. Well, I did. I memorized the code. The code was a 5 by 5 box of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, 5 lines, 5 rows. And numbers down the side and across the top, indicating any letter, would be represented by 2 numbers, number of the line, then the number of the row. Got it? A, we left out K to make it come out 5 by 5. So A, first line, first row, 1 tug, 1 more tug. Z, fifth. You think your email is cumbersome? You try this. But it worked. It worked. This silly, archaic, cumbersome, difficult code became our language. More than that, it became our lifeblood. I mean, life and death difference to communicate, to the point that if you were in a solitary confinement room, and a lot of us were, for one guy, for 4.5 years alone. I mean, I had roommates after the first few weeks. And if you were in solitary confinement and it was dark, it seemed like those 2 things would play with your mind. You wouldn't remember what's a real memory, what's a hallucination of a memory. You were kind of right on the edge there, wondering sometimes if you were alive or dead. The simple tugging on a wire, and to have that wire tugged back meant 2 things. Number one, somebody's responding to something I'm doing physically. That's I exist. I'm alive. Number 2, somebody cares. In this day and age, you and I would probably argue that the greatest achievement of all times is AI, or the fact that we can pass a packet of data around the world on a cell phone. I'm here to suggest to you that maybe your very purpose in life, especially in this business, is to validate other people. It's the old adage, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's true. And to the point, life-saving communication to the point that if a guy got put in the far corner of the prison camp and you couldn't communicate with him, he probably wasn't going to make it. It was just that vital that we all communicate. Oh, here's the interesting part. It wasn't the words. It wasn't the sentences. It wasn't the top secret escape plans that was the important part of communication, okay? It wasn't the data. What it was the validation of another human being. And that's kind of what sales is all about, is validation. I think that's what parenting is about. I think that's what life is about, okay, is validating. So on the other end of the wire, Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker, fighter pilot extraordinaire, astronaut candidate. Okay, this guy had orders to Nassau when he was shot down. He was there over 8 years. So he'd been there 2 years when I showed up. And he'd been piecing together little bits of wire, stuffing them out a hole in his cell wall across a storeroom between our two prison cells. He fished that wire over the boxes and around the shovels and through the ropes and into the little hole in my 14 feet away, just to pack my parachute, just to get me some of those nuggets I was going to need. He said, I've been here for 2 years, Plumber. That was my call sign, Plumber. Could have been Maverick. I don't know. You don't choose your own call signs. He said, I've been there 2 years, seen men come, seen men go. Most of them live, he said. Some of them die. He said, if there's any single one principle of survival in a prison camp, it's that you believe. You got to believe that even through all of this pain, there's going to be a future in it, that there's some purpose to your being here, that we are warriors, we are combatants, we are not on the defensive. I'm looking around at that 8-foot by prison cell saying, yeah, I'm not on the defensive, right? He said, pull up your big boy pants, we got a war to fight. Changed our whole outlook on life. He said, our leadership in here has a motto. It's 3 words, simple, but you need to filter every decision you make through this motto. Here it is: return with honor. Whew. Well, it worked. So we had great leadership in that prison camp. John McCain was one of them, one of the great leaders there, one of the toughest guys I ever met. He had 7 broken bones when he was shot down, and they were twisting his poor broken bones to torture the poor guy. Well, one of the best leaders turned out to be an enlisted guy, a Navy sailor, a boot. Wait a minute there, Captain. You just told us that you're only fighter pilots in there. It was an air war over North Vietnam and you were being shot down. You had a prison camp full of fighter pilots. How did a sailor get into a prison camp? Well, he fell off his ship. Got washed ashore. He used to tell us I wasn't captured, I was rescued. And he was. But he decided that there was a purpose to his life in all this adversity, that there would be some advantage to all this. He started memorizing names. He'd spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day on the lists. 254 of us in that prison camp. He memorized 254 names. Then he went back through the list, memorized our social security number or identifier. Went back through the list and memorized our next of kin and their hometowns and their telephone numbers. Had this great memory of data. Well, about that time, thanks largely to our wives, we're back here petitioning our government to put pressure on the North Vietnamese to stop torturing their husbands. Treatment began to improve. And the torture stopped for the most part. And they decided to send a couple of guys home early before the end of the war. First guy they went to was John McCain. His dad was in charge of the Vietnam War. McCain said, in your dreams, I would never embarrass my father by doing it. You take your idea and shove it. He got into a lot of trouble by refusing to go home first. So they went to the sailor, and our senior man sent a message to the sailor. Son, I want you to volunteer to go home first. He said, sir, I'd rather stay here with the team. Our senior guy gave him the direct order, shove off, sailor. And he did. And he came home. Now write the script on this kid. Okay, now he's 21 years old, right? He's been in prison by accident. He's been starved, humiliated, lonely, tortured. Things are looking up. Brand new suit of clothes on, 2 years back pay in his pocket, and he's free on the streets of San Diego. What would you expect of this sailor? Oh, did I tell you he was a parachute packer? Sure. West coast to east, north to south, and went through each one of the hometowns he'd memorized. He dialed each one of the telephone numbers he'd memorized. He spoke to each one of the wives he'd memorized, told her that her husband was alive. A great hero of ours is Doug Hegdahl. Well, the war finally ended, and we came home. They expected us to be in baskets. They thought we would be terribly injured mentally by this experience. They had our families briefed to institutionalize us for the rest of our lives. The first guy I saw was a psychiatrist. He told me that my wife had filed for divorce just 3 months ago. She's engaged to another guy. He said, you need to get angry about that. You need to show some emotion. The longer you wait to show some emotion, some pain, some anger, some vitriol, the longer you wait, the tougher it's going to be to have that breakdown. You have the right to be bitter. I said, Doc, I have the right to have diarrhea. I choose not to be bitter. Thank you very much. I want to get on with my life. And I did. The other guys did too. 591 of us came home. 591. Not a big number for a war that lasted that long. From 591 men, we have produced 17 generals and 7 admirals. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. 90% of the Vietnam POWs stayed in the military. We continue to fly airplanes, command ships and battalions and fleets all over the world. We have doctors and lawyers and preachers and teachers and bishops and judges and, yes, real estate agents and mortgage lenders and 2 United States senators, 2 ambassadors from our number, a vice presidential candidate, and a presidential candidate from 591 men. So how does that validate my principle that getting blown out of the sky can actually be good for you? That 2 years of a downturn in the mortgage business can actually be good for you. It's tough to explain to somebody while they're going through that this can be advantageous, but it is, and it works. Shoemaker had gone into the war. Remember him? 2-star admiral today. Who else? Oh, the guy in my back seat, my co-pilot, came back to the States, went back to flying Navy jets off aircraft carriers. Some guys never learn. That's not fair, because I continued in the Navy, flew some great airplanes. I flew F-18s. In fact, I got a ride with the Blue Angels last year for my 80th birthday. Pretty exciting stuff. Let's see, who else did I? Oh, the kid that memorized the names, the sailor. He's a teacher. Still packing those parachutes. My wife, she married the guy she was engaged to. They're living happily ever after. And I remarried a wonderful lady. We have 4 kids and 4 grandkids and live a very happy life. So what's the message here? Why do you need in the mortgage business to listen to war stories of this old graybeard? Well, just this. If you can really look at this stage in your life, if you can really look, if you could, step up to the mirror, put your nose in the mirror, and say to yourself, "I will overcome this. I have the grit. Okay, I can take advantage because this adversity is a horrible thing to waste. And get outside yourself. Go tug on a wire. Take a risk, okay? Got to get into action. The worst thing you can do, okay, is sit on your couch with your clicker and feel sorry for yourself. And yet, that's what a lot of your contemporaries have done in the last couple of years. And it's true. So, again, great to be with you. Great to be with you again, Brian and Maria Elena. And great to be part of this roadmap, because I think we all need the roadmap. Back to you, my friend.